It is December 1st, 2021. My name is Emma Maggart. I am with the Indiana Jewish Historical Society, and today I'm speaking with David Sanders in West Lafayette, Indiana. So we'll just start by, can you tell me where you were born and a little bit about your early childhood?
Sure. Well, I was born in Jersey City, New Jersey, but my parents very soon after that moved to Teaneck, New Jersey, where I grew up. I went to high school in New York City at a place called Horace Mann in Riverdale. I then went to Yale College, graduated in 1983. After that, I went to UC Berkeley, where I got my PhD in biochemistry. I was briefly a visiting scientist at the University of California, San Francisco. And then I went to the Whitehead Institute for Biomedical Research, which is associated with MIT in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And then I took my first and only faculty position here at Purdue University in 1995.
Wow, it's quite an experience.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about your community? Were you living in a Jewish community in New Jersey?
Oh, yes. Well, Teaneck, you may be familiar with, is quite a Jewish community. Extensive Jewish population, restaurants, schools, well known as a Jewish community. And it was an interesting community because it was racially and ethnically quite mixed. Substantial Jewish population, but there was also a substantial Irish and Italian population, a substantial African American population. And I went to the public schools until ninth grade, and so I was, we were a very integrated community.
So you're making your decision to go to Yale. What were some factors that played into that? Did you know you wanted to do biochemistry?
Yes, so my actual major there was molecular biophysics and biochemistry, and I sort of knew I wanted to do that. I wasn't 100% sure. I was thinking about physics as well. It turns out that I did all of the course requirements for a history major as well, but they didn't give double majors in those days, so I didn't actually get a second degree. But I just went there because I felt it was the best place for undergraduate education. And I wanted to get an all-around education. I took, courses in music theory and composition. I was in courses of art history and philosophy, besides history itself. So I fondly remember my English courses, which were excellent as well. So. I went there because I thought it would be the best place to get an all-round education.
Did you have any particular feeling that your Jewish identity played a role in that?
So there was what was called the Young Israel House at Yale. Then at the time it was referred to colloquially as the Kosher Kitchen. Okay. It was slightly off campus. And that really was a nice community to belong to. I did belonged to the Orthodox Minyan there, and I was a regular leader of that community. Did something. I read Torah. I led services. I was a bit of a mainstay, but it also interacting with students from all over the country who were Jewish. It enabled the growth of my own Jewish practice and identity.
That's great.
And I also met my first wife there. She was an undergraduate there as well, and she was Sephardic. So being exposed to that culture through her family was very important as well.
Yeah. Can you expand on that a little bit? Just some differences.
Sure. So, we used to go to her family for Passover, and they would do the service in Ladino, which is Judeo-Spanish. And I actually speak Spanish, so Ladino was very easy for me, easier than for my wife, who didn't speak Spanish. So, I understood everything, and it has a whole, there's all sorts of rituals that are associated with the Sephardic tradition. It's very, it's a rich, important tradition. And as it happened, so I'll just mention, so my wife was also a scientist. She was also a professor here. Fortunately, only a couple years after we came here, she was diagnosed with a brain tumor, and she passed away in 2006.
I'm so sorry.
But I have started up a Shabbaton, a weekend program at Yale in her memory that's specifically about Sephardic culture.
That's wonderful.
And it's focused, instead of being, people who are not in that culture just think of it as some sort of amorphous ensemble, and it's not. So what's important about this Shabbaton is that it's focused on particular Sephardic communities mostly around the Mediterranean, and it's going to be, food and lectures and something about their rituals and so on and so forth. So it's so that was an important part.
Yes, definitely.
Of going to Yale.
So when you moved to your next institution, was your Jewish identity something that was remained involved as each institution? Were you always
Absolutely.
involved in those
When I was at
communities?
Berkeley, I even took a larger role in reading Torah and running services. The high holiday services, I was one of the people who ran them, who led the services. And as a matter of fact, I was just on sabbatical in 2020 in Berkeley. And they invited me to do it. I hadn't done it for 31 years.
Oh, wow.
I mean, in Berkeley. I've been doing it in many other communities where I've lived. But they invited me back to lead the services and to blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. So yeah, and actually this year I was back and I blew the shofar at the end of Yom Kippur down in Indianapolis, where I associated as well. So at Berkeley, it's been a continuous growth in my Jewish practice, Jewish identity, and exposure to different communities. And I've, frequently been sort of thrust into leadership positions in these various communities that I've joined.
Yeah. So within the various communities, are there specific key differences you notice as you travel from one to the other, or some perhaps common threads that you find?
Well, the common thread, of course, is Shabbat and the ritual and the community, and focus on food as an important component. One of the things that I think people sometimes don't understand, about Judaism is that it really is we have a lot of things that occur outside the home, but it really is a home-focused community and practice, and so that's something that I carried along. I started in Berkeley. I had my first son. My second son was when we were living in Cambridge. Third son was here in West Lafayette. So a lot of it focuses around the family. But growing up in Teaneck, it was a fairly formal. It was a formal Jewish community. Yale was a student-based community. At Berkeley, it was a Berkeley type of community. There was an emphasis on things one wouldn't have heard about it in Teaneck or at Yale. I do remember one thing that was really stood out was we have announcements at the end of a service, community announcements. They normally take 3 to 5 minutes. I mean, at Berkeley, they could sometimes take 45 minutes. Every community group, wanted their input. People were just announcing everything that was going on. And I mean, some of it was touching because it would be about things, individuals in the community who needed help, or some exciting thing that they were doing or something like that. So some of it was like that, but so it was a different thing when we moved to Cambridge. Well, first we were in Worcester because my wife was finishing up her PhD. She also got a PhD in biochemistry at Berkeley. And she finished up a little after I did. So we moved she was working at UMass Worcester, so she got her PhD from Berkeley. while I was commuting into Cambridge to the White Institute. So I lived in Worcester. I was the regular Torah, reader, and I led the services on the high holidays. Did stuff like that. And then in Cambridge, once again, I wound up doing that. And Cambridge was Cambridge. So each community has its own flavor. And then I came here, and it was quite different from any of the other ones. Smaller, older. And struggling almost from the beginning that I got here. It's a small community. I often say that the synagogue in Lafayette, Sons of Abraham, is one of the longest continuously operating synagogues in the entire Midwest. My son, who's an archaeologist, knows some history, says as far as he can tell, it's the oldest continuously operating synagogue. Now, what do I mean by that? Not oldest community. I'm talking about the oldest synagogue building that has been in the same place continuously. It's, I think, 1916. So, and most communities in the Midwest have moved from where they were. They would have been downtown, Maxwell Street, or whatever it is, in Chicago. They moved to other places around the city. So it may be that the same community moved from here to here, but they're not occupying the same building, unlike Sons of Abraham. But it's always been, it's not been a huge community at any time, and it's been diminishing over time, and now post-COVID, it's having very difficult times.
So, can we talk about your decision to come to Purdue a little bit?
Sure.
Can you just talk me through that process of how you ended up choosing here?
Yeah, it was mostly two reasons. One of them was for what both my wife and I did, which was structural biology and virology, viruses. Purdue is one of the best places in the world. At least it was at the time. And so I came from my colleagues. I thought it would just be a great academic environment for both of our work. We had other offers, but this one, in terms of academics, was the best. The second thing is that my wife's family was from Skokie, and then they lived in Buffalo Grove and Northbrook, so they all lived in the Chicago area. And her family was quite tight, and my wife wanted to be as close to them as possible, and this was the closest job that we both had that was close to them. We were still thought of as being, very, very distant. I thought we were close enough, so those were the two elements that entered it. And at the time we came here, there was Hillel was active. We had a rabbi at the synagogue. There was a regular minyan. So I thought, okay, things. And there was somebody who taught the children Hebrew. Had a colleague named Ed Simon, whose wife was Sorrel, and they became very, very close friends of ours. They lived here, and she taught them, modern Hebrew and so on. So we thought, this is a place where we can, have some sort of community. It wasn't the ideal, but
it was something.
Yes.
Very interesting. And what year did you come?
95.
95. Right. So you said that one of your children was born here, correct?
Correct.
Can you talk about that experience of raising children here as Jewish individuals and somewhere where there's not as thriving community as what you were raised in?
Yeah, it wasn't the same, but as I mentioned before, even if I were in some other community, I really believe that everything actually revolves around the family and the home. That it's not institutional Judaism, which is at the core. It is family Judaism, and also how the family fits into the community. But so I always felt like they should be getting their Jewish education through example, not through learning in school. I feel in general, even though I'm an educator myself, I feel that we put too much responsibility on schools and other institutions to educate our children. I believe that we should mostly be educating themselves. I'll be honest, I sent my kids to the public schools. My youngest, who was born here, he wound up going to Ida Crown, which is it was in Skokie, at maybe it was even West Rogers Park when it was there. In any case, it's up in Chicago. So he went there for his last 3 years of high school before he went off to college. But I feel like, I sent them to the public schools for socialization skills. Anything that's important, they're going to learn from my wife and from me, right? I mean, and which they did, I often said, if I took them out for a day just to go hiking or something, they would learn more in that day than they'd learn in a whole month. Now, I understand that I'm a strong supporter of the public schools, and I understand how most people can't necessarily do that, right? They can't necessarily provide the education for their children. They have time pressures, inadequate past education themselves. But fortunately, we could, and the same thing was true for Jewish. We demonstrated through practice, and I taught my children how to read the Torah. How to read biblical Hebrew, how to read the Torah, how to study the Talmud, how to understand the biblical commentaries, how to lead services. I taught them all of that, and that was something that we did. It's one of the, I find it hard to understand how people can go through life without a Shabbat. How people could not have a day, where they just take stay away from TV, phones, driving around, whatever it is, and not just have that family day. I find it incredibly valuable, and we spent the day together. It wasn't only studying; we also played games, and we had great meals. Of course, that was the best meals of the week. But to have that day off was an incredibly valuable thing, and I try to emphasize to them, not that the view from the outside, the Judaism is about all restrictions. It's really about, the rules create an environment in where you can actually bloom and grow and enjoy life. And so that's what I try to inculcate into my children. I think they continue to have that attitude. There were occasional conflicts, where in this community, as opposed to Teaneck, where I grew up, Teaneck, people wouldn't schedule things on Saturdays. They knew that they were just, they'd be excluding a large part of the population. Here, everything's on Saturdays.
That's very true. It is.
Whether it's, my kids would have been great at debate club and all this super, whatever, academic goal or whatever it is. But they were excluded from all those things. They were excluded from a substantial amount of the sports. In Teaneck, we didn't have, the Little League didn't play on Saturdays, They played on Sundays and they played on weekdays. But here everything's on a Saturday. And so that was tough for them. There was occasional tension about their inability to participate in those things, but not much. I think they appreciated what Saturday meant, what Shabbat meant for us as a family.
That's great. And what are your children doing now? You mentioned one's an archaeologist.
Yes, he's in Turkey now.
Oh, wow.
So as he's an archaeologist, so I tell him his career is going to be in ruins. And the oldest one is a postdoc at MIT, just a block away from the building where I used to work. He's in computational neurobiology, and he lives in Somerville, and so does my youngest son. We're renovating the place, but they're actually going to live together. My oldest son is married now, and the youngest son works on compilers for a particular hardware that a startup company is designing. So he's in computer science.
Really, they've had a strong upbringing to be able to pursue all these fascinating careers.
My son is now the president of the synagogue where I was, back in the 90s.
That's wonderful.
And he leads
Full circle.
he leads the Torah for them. Everybody, everybody. They remember. Some of them remember him from when he was, a small child on my shoulders on Simchat Torah, and so he's the leader there, and my younger son also leads services and is active and so on. My middle son actually led some of the services in Istanbul, in the synagogue in Istanbul for the high holidays. So yeah, they're continuing, and again, I like to focus on the fact that this is a rich, rewarding religion, not just not what people might think of it from the outside.
It certainly is rewarding.
Yes.
If there was one more thing you'd say about like the essence of being a community leader in Purdue and West Lafayette, what would you say?
Yeah, I mean it's hard. I often think it would be so much nicer to just be able to relax and let other people take care of things. But even when I go, so right now, I'm in mourning for my mother. My mother passed away in April. So because we say Kaddish, the mourner's Kaddish, and it's different. You can only say that with a minyan. Can't get a minyan regularly here, so I travel every weekend somewhere. Normally either Indianapolis or Chicago. And in some of those places, in Indianapolis or Chicago, I'm still the leader. Even though I just go there on an occasional basis. I mean, now it's more frequent. I regularly read the Haftarah. They sometimes ask me to read the Torah. I lead services. I sometimes give classes, lectures. I have lectured all over the world on Jewish topics. And so, but sometimes I prefer to do less. Now here in town, I was president of the synagogue, president of the federation here. I am the regular Torah reader, regular leader, including of the high holidays. I host the big seders that occur. There are people in town that, if I'm not here for the seder, they don't have any seder whatsoever. We've always hosted students. I'm interested lots of interesting stories about students who reconnected with their Judaism, and that continued with them afterwards because of their coming to our house for Shabbat meals. We have for many years, the only real sukkah in town. So we had we're always hosting guests every night of that. I have been head of the Chevra Kadisha, the Holy Society that's responsible for burials. I do funerals. I don't need to do these things. It would be I'd be okay if I were in a community where I didn't have to do all these things. But there's an expression, something like "Bimkom she'en ish tisadel liot ish." Not sure if I got that quite right, but in a place where there is no man, strive to be a man. And so you do what you have to do. I mean, I believe in this. I believe that this is a rewarding experience for Jews, and that it is a community religion. And that's one of the things that again, people don't. We are never interested in individual salvation. All of our prayers are geared towards community salvation. That's why there's the requirement of the minyan. The prayers are almost all in the plural because they're about community, local community, and the community of all Jews around the world. So I play a very small part in this in a very small community. But again, if there's nobody else to pick up the baton, you've got to pick it up and run with it. And so, that's what I do. one of the nice things about being in a community like this is that there are many firsts that haven't been in this community, in living memory.
Yeah.
So one of them is we needed a new Torah scroll.
Okay.
And I was privileged to be able to, get funds. There was funds in the community and buy a Torah scroll and actually have an event where we had, for example, the mayor of Lafayette came and joined us as we had this public ceremony of welcoming the Torah scroll to the synagogue. It's called Achnasat Torah. And another thing is, just relatively recently, we had something called a siyum. What's a siyum? Well, when somebody finishes some part of the Talmud, they throw a party. And there no such thing had occurred in this community in living memory. I decided to have one, and we had it relatively recently outdoors, because I'm very strict about my COVID protocols. But I provided all the food, I served everybody, and we had the siyum. Again, in larger communities, these things are routine. Here, not so common. So they're a big deal when they actually happen. So that's again little compensation for being in this. That you get to do these like one-time things that no one's ever seen before.
Yeah, it's exciting.
Yes.
To have that presence.
Yes.
I'd like to hear more about, you said you lecture on Jewish topics worldwide. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. I mean, wherever I travel, people know of my interest and ability to convey things to people, and in a high intellectual level, but still in a way that people can understand. My Hebrew is pretty good, so even if I go to Israel, I tell people beforehand. They ask me to give a lesson so typically Shabbat lessons frequently are focused on the Torah portion that people are reading. So I've got lots of them ready, but I sometimes will prepare something for that specific thing. I've spoken, and my second wife is from the UK. We got married in 2016. We married in 2016, so we go there quite often. Every time I go, they ask me to give a class on some Jewish topic, and I've spoken about things like there's this Talmudic character called Elisha ben Avuya, sometimes called Acher. I've given lectures about that. We've given lectures recently about Shabtai Tzvi. I've given lectures about the Greek origins of various words in the Talmud. The structure of the Seder. I give, lectures on the structure of the Seder. And many of them, I work on, sometimes I connect my science work. So people ask me to talk about, evolution and its relationship to Jewish belief, or Ebola and how it relates to, I was able once to work out actually a relationship between Ebola and the Torah portion. So, So I've given, I'm constantly invited to give talks. Sometimes, people just want to hear about the scientific topic, but I do that in a synagogue context. Those are some of my most recent. But wherever I travel, and sometimes it's just off the cuff. Could you speak about the Torah portion today? I said, sure. I can always share something.
Yeah, that's wonderful having that opportunity to.
Yes.
Talk to so many people all over the world.
Yeah. It's one of the great things about being an academic is that you have connections with people all over. And I also am pretty good about staying in touch with people from the various parts of my life, from elementary school through, Purdue. I organized, during the COVID, I was organizing these Zoom, reunions of people from various different parts of my life, and so people, appreciated that.
Of course.
A lot. I will mention. So my own study, and this is the way I taught my children as well, is I create these Jewish studies projects for myself. So you have the Torah, which is read on an annual basis, right? You read the whole Torah on an annual basis. And then there are these things called commentaries on the Torah. Well, I believe in reading them start to finish, not sort of picking and choosing, which is what people do. And so I read them start to finish. I do that, many years. One year I will devote to this commentary and then that commentary. I've read about 20 of them. And so when you have that at your fingertips, you can, readily pick something out to talk about, drop the hat about a Torah portion, about other things. I combine science. There's also a Greek writer named Josephus, who is our great historian for that time. It's not just the best Jewish historian of that time. There were very few historians for part of what he's covering at the time. So I've read Josephus, and I can work in Josephus into my talks.
It's really helpful to have all that extra perspective.
Yes.
You have a bunch of other sources you're reading. And
yes.
With the Torah.
Yeah, and I bring in, there's discussion about why is it that the rabbis always diluted their wine. Well, it turns out the Greco-Romans always dilute their wine. And it's all based on microbiology. So, and what's interesting is the barbarians didn't, like the Scythians typically, they did not dilute their wine. So why is that? Well, if you live in a city, your water is going to be contaminated by microbes. But you still have to drink water. So what do? You mix it with wine, or which kills some of the bacteria, and therefore you're actually not you're putting the water in the wine in order to increase your water consumption. Whereas if you live out in the countryside, you're roaming around, water's clean out there. So you don't have to dilute your wine. I mean, beer, and beer, people often think of ancient Israel, wine, right? That's what you think about. But actually beer was the major drink of the Middle East. And if you can look into that, so on and so forth. But in any case, a lot of it has a scientific basis.
It's fascinating.
And so that's that.
Love when that all ties in together.
Yes.
And you're perfectly situated to speak to people about this.
It's true.
A very strong background in both aspects.
That's right. And as it happens, I'm also locally, I'm a West Lafayette City Councilor. And so I combine an interest in science and public policy as well. So I currently teach the COVID class at Purdue, where we combine science, virology and immunology, with history, with politics, with economics, with sociology.
Everything.
And, when they asked me to do this, I said, David, you're the perfect person to do this, because you do combine all those interests. And so that's why I teach that sort of class.
Well, thank you so much for your time.
Sure.
It was a pleasure